Now, factory activity remains in the doldrums. A slight uptick of 1.9 points in the Absa PMI for the month of June hasn't been enough to drag manufacturing out of negative territory during the period. This marks the second consecutive month that the PMI remained below the 50-point mark. Sello Sekele, Economist at Absa CIB, joins us with great analysis and perspective on the print. Sello, thank you for your time and a good afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
So a slight uptick from last month, but still, in contractive territory. Help us make sense of it.
Yeah, so as you point out, the index did improve, but for the fact that it remained below 50 points, it continues to say, look, business conditions in the sector, remain quite challenging. And what's interesting to us with that is that, look, we didn't have load shedding in the month of June, right? But still, business conditions continue to be challenging. So what that says to us is that, look, demand is quite weak, and because demand is quite weak, not just on the domestic front, but also globally, manufacturers continue to see challenging business conditions.
It is very interesting, I think, when we do speak of the fact that electricity hasn't been the main picture here. When we speak of demand also, so I also want to then reflect on logistics. Is it also a matter of just not being able to push the volumes? What is the logistics part of this that we're seeing come through?
Yeah, so we see something interesting, right? In terms of the index that measures supplier delivery times, that index increased, but it increased while activity is subdued. So what that tells us is that maybe there were some logistical bottlenecks in the month of June.
Then let's talk about inventories and stock here. What do we know about issues of being able to push stock through? You have mentioned issues of stockpiling, but also I just keen to reflect on the inventory index that's also up quite a bit.
Yeah, so if you think about it, right, because there isn't much demand, what you'll see is that what's produced because it's not demanded will end up as inventory. So we think that's what's happening in that space.
Let's talk about pricing, a big one here. What are we seeing in terms of the purchasing price index, and how does that also relate to overall PPI?
Yeah, so it looks like price pressures are easing in the manufacturing sector, and we think that it's partly due to a stronger rand in the month, as well as the fuel price cuts that we saw at the beginning of the month. So because the price index of the manufacturing PMI tends to correlate very well with the PPI for intermediate goods, it's pointing to PPI inflation coming down further in the month of June.
So now what we have said here is the fact that demand is currently low, and we're seeing that being true both in the local market as well as the global market. But when we see at expected business conditions, that ticked up, that's actually in expansion territory. So in my mind, it tells that sentiments show that, there's an expectation that something will happen here. What might happen?
Yeah, so what's interesting here is that because we did this survey, or the BR did this survey before the GNU executive was announced, it looks like the manufacturers are hoping for a political outcome that's market friendly. So that was the thinking, we think, when the survey was done.
There's also the issue of jobs here. Now, let's talk about that. I see an improvement in the employment index. But of course, when we look at what we're seeing coming out of Stats SA, Sello, we're still seeing the manufacturing industry battling quite a bit.
Yeah, so when it comes to the employment sub-index, I want us to take that with a pinch of salt, right? Because yes, it did increase, but it remained below 50, which basically means that jobs are continuing to fall, but by a slower rate. Right, and that index, as long as we don't see improved, sustainable improvement in activity in the sector, that index is likely to remain in those levels for at least in the near term.
And then also when we look at, all the uncertainty that still lingers, I think in the markets, we have this GNU now, I think we kind of have a way forward here. Even then, and then also with better electricity, it looks like, there are still other key structural and fundamental issues, Sello, that would have to give rise to sentiments in this industry. And even though the power issue has been resolved, and even though we have a government now, we may see this industry still in contractionary territory for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, so I like how you put it. It shows how important structural reforms are, right? Because what's going to be interesting for us in the economic space is what are the key policy priorities of the seventh administration when President Ramaphosa opens Parliament on the 18th of July. So we'll be keeping a close look on that to see because there is no contention. We need structural reforms that will lift growth in South Africa in a way that per capita incomes also improve.
Well, hopefully we can see all of that emerge. We all desperately want to see it, Sello. Thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure having you here on Business Lunch. That was Economist at Absa CIB, Sello Sekele.